Week 5 of the NFL season starts tonight with the Bucs going to Atlanta. We will get into that one on this episode, maybe look at a couple of player props, although I would also say with the level of wrong I achieved in that Steelers-Colts game last Sunday, we are far from reliable in that department. I mean, that was so bad. And the worst part, or maybe the best part, right? Got to be able to laugh at yourself. It went that way from basically the opening kickoff. Anthony Richardson throws a laser to Pittman to get that first drive going. Colts go right down the field for the touchdown. Then they lose Richardson to injury early on. Joe Flacco comes in, and by the end of that thing, they had put up 27 on the Steelers' defense. A defense that I was sure would dominate the game. And they not only give up more points in week 4 to the Colts than they had all season up to that point, they got pushed around. That game was not quite as close as the final score would indicate. I know Pittsburgh had kind of one last gasp drive. I do think it was more of an outlier than what we can expect to see from this defense the rest of the way. But yeah, no doubt about it. Big bowl of wrong on the Steelers pick in week 4. We had another 2-game Monday Night Football week with the Titans-Dolphins and Seahawks-Lions. As I've said before, I don't necessarily want to use the term doubleheader because the games are not back-to-back. They have about 3-ish quarters of overlap. But this is now 2 straight Mondays where if you are just tuning in as a neutral fan, wanting to watch some good ball, the earlier kicks have not delivered. And with Tennessee-Miami this week, that was brutal. I realize the Dolphins are in a tough spot, starting Snoop Huntley in that one after just signing him maybe like a week or so before the game. But to get cooked at home by a Titans team that started the game with Will Levis and finished it with Mason Rudolph, that's pretty low. Now, the next couple of weeks, we go back to the standalone Monday night games, but then we're back to the 2-game format again in week 7. Some headlines coming out of Sunday as we move toward week 5 in 2024. Some new, some recurring. We'll start with the Tampa Eagles game. The Buccaneers ended the Eagles season last year at Raymond James in the playoff game. That one wasn't really close, and then they just embarrassed the Eagles again on Sunday. And to be fair, Eagles went into that one pretty banged up. No Davante Smith, no A.J. Brown, Lane Johnson. They were clearly not at full strength, but they got dominated now for the second straight matchup with Tampa. And the Nick Sirianni situation just continues to become more negative by the week. I know there are a lot of Philly fans who have been calling for his firing. I don't expect that to quiet down anytime soon. It's a long season, still got 13 more regular season games to go, but this thing just feels like it's been spiraling for a long time now. Really going all the way back to the second half of last season. The Eagles beat the Bills in a close game at home. I want to say at the time it got them to either 9-1 or 10-1. But ever since that game against Buffalo, the Eagles are 3-8 in their last 11. And that includes the playoff loss at Tampa. It's also been reported that the head coach-quarterback relationship is not the greatest right now. I don't get the sense that the Eagles would fire Sirianni mid-season. Now, if things just got really out of hand and they hit a stretch where, maybe they drop 4 out of 5 and they're eliminated from playoff contention, maybe that changes. They did fire Chip Kelly with 1 game left in 2015, but at that point, they were 6-9 going into that final week. The season was over. I'm also seeing a lot of, fire Sirianni, hire Bill Belichick sentiment out there, which, as bad as things have been going for the Eagles, I think we can all agree that is not going to happen mid-season, right? They're not going to terminate Sirianni and have Bill out there, week 6 against the Browns. But I think we are going to be seeing the Belichick talk continuing to heat up as we get deeper into the season. And that goes for multiple teams, whether that's Philadelphia or Dallas, Jacksonville, Chicago, the Giants. I have a feeling we will be hearing a lot on Belichick. Speaking of the Browns, they dropped to 1-3 with the road loss in Las Vegas last week. The Browns' offense is really struggling, especially up front. Deshaun Watson has been sacked a league-high 19 times through the first 4 games. Caleb Williams is second at 16. Now, they have some injuries on that O-line, so that's certainly not helping. They had some issues with the center-quarterback exchange on Sunday when the backup was in there. But they just cannot seem to establish any kind of rhythm whatsoever offensively. They have actually opened up with touchdown drives in 3 of their 4 games. But then it's just a bunch of nothing after that. Like on Sunday, they got a defensive score on the scoop 6 on the Zamir White fumble. But otherwise, the offense put up just 10 points. They did have a long Amari Cooper touchdown called back due to a holding call that would have been the go-ahead score or potentially the game-winning score at that point. So that one stings if you are a Browns fan. But think about this, because I've said many times before, the Browns have one of the more impressive rosters in the entire league. It is certainly better than the Raiders top to bottom in 2024. If I were to tell you the Raiders are going to be without Davante Adams and Max Crosby, who are and have been their 2 best players by a long shot for the past few years running now, the Raiders are going to be without those guys. Browns are going to get an opening drive touchdown. They're also going to get a defensive touchdown on a fourth quarter Raiders fumble. Deshaun Watson is going to complete 75% of his passes. Minshew is going to throw for a grand total of 130 yards. Brock Bowers is going to have 2 catches for 19 yards. I think most people would be saying, okay, how lopsided did this thing get? How many touchdowns did the Browns win by? So to lose that game is just, you cannot afford to drop it. They should have never been in a position where a holding call can take your game-winning touchdown off the board, because it should have never been that close at that point in the game to begin with. Now, I will say, Deshaun Watson played a decent game. I don't think it would be fair to put that one on him last week. As I mentioned, he completed 75% of his throws. The interception was not on him if you were watching the game. I mean, it was a perfect throw to Amari Cooper, and it just bounces right off his chest into Morig's hands for the pick. But they need to figure something out offensively. They're not getting the ball downfield, which, granted, is really hard to do when you're not getting protection in the pass game. But for the season, Deshaun Watson is averaging just 4.9 yards per attempt. That is abysmal. The only quarterbacks with a yards per attempt lower than that are Bo Nix, Bryce Young, and Tyler Huntley. Again, things are not good up front for the Browns, but you cannot have the quarterback on a $230 million fully guaranteed contract and fall below Mason Rudolph in any metric, yards per attempt or otherwise. Next 2 games for the Browns are at Commanders and at Philadelphia. Now, we just talked about how things are really shaky in Philly, but depending on how things go this week for both the Browns and the Eagles, that game at the Link could end up being for one or both of their seasons. Other storyline I wanted to touch on is the ongoing discussion around Davante Adams and where we may see him being traded to. Who knows? By the time this uploads, the discussion could be meaningless. It's part of what makes the NFL so great. It is a nonstop news cycle. 2 weeks ago, Davante Adams was catching 9 balls for 110 yards and the game-tying touchdown in the upset at Baltimore. Now, we're talking about trade packages and Does he go to the Saints? Does he go to the Jets? I totally understand those two teams being in the discussion and would agree that they seem to be the most likely landing spots. But I do want to expand the conversation just a little bit in the interest of taking some other things into consideration. First off, the Raiders organization does not have any responsibility whatsoever to trade him to a specific destination that he dictates. This is not the NBA where the star players are the de facto GMs. That is not how it works in the National Football League. And I'll even use a recent NBA example while we're on the topic. Now, it's an outlier for the association, but I think it's just a good reminder that as recently as last offseason, we were seeing Dame Lillard to the Miami Heat. That's where Lillard said he wanted to be traded to. And then when he gets traded, it's to the Milwaukee Bucks. And why do you think that was? Because the Blazers felt they were getting a package in return better from that three-teamer than what Miami was willing to offer. It's that simple. So I'm not saying it means Davante Adams won't be going to the Saints or the Jets, but if a different team comes in with a bigger offer, that would then be the likely landing spot. Now, there are some other factors in play here, right? Who picks up the remainder of his 2024 money? Does he restructure or sign an extension with the team he gets traded to? Is that agreement worked out before he gets traded? As an example, the Jets traded for Hassan Reddick in the offseason. They still have not come to terms on a new contract. He has not yet played it down for the Jets. They gave the Eagles a third-round pick for him. So whatever the miscommunication was there, that cannot happen with whatever team offers the Raiders in a potential Adams deal. And it will also impact what a team is willing to offer in the first place. I think it is unlikely that this turns into a one-year rent-a-player. Adams is just too good of a player for a situation that, maybe a team isn't able to come to terms on some type of handshake agreement with Adams and his team on an extension, because I just don't see anybody being willing to give up what the Raiders are expecting to come back if they are unable to secure a multi-year commitment beyond 2024 with Davante Adams. We'll see how this plays out with Adams. Will he be reunited with Derek Carr or Aaron Rodgers, or does he end up elsewhere? Bucs-Falcons. Some player props that jumped out for this one. Kyle Pitts at 29.5 receiving yards. I know he put up the goose egg last week, so that kind of felt like Arthur Smith all over again. But I think he gets over that number tonight. I know it sounds overly basic on the reasoning here. I just don't see how he goes without a single catch in week 4 and then doesn't get at least minimal production this week. So Pitts on the over at 29.5 receiving yards. The other one, Bucky Irving, 9.5 rushing attempts. I'm going to lean over on this. His carries have ticked up each week that he's played, and we saw 10 carries last week against Philadelphia. I'm not generally a fan of running back carry totals, especially in a backfield where that team splits the work. But I think even if we see a lot of Rachaad White in this one, we will see enough of an overall commitment to running the football from the Buccaneers, and that should be enough to get Irving to 10-plus touches. Atlanta comes in as a slight favorite at -1.5. I like the Falcons to win this game. I said before the season I thought the Falcons were an 11-win team. Now, 2-2 is not exactly the best start to getting to 11, but they just cannot afford to fall 2 games behind the Bucs, which is where they'd be if they lost this game. I think Atlanta rides the momentum of the long game-winning field goal last week. They get it going offensively in week 5 and beat the Bucs at home on the short week. Enjoy the game tonight. Thank you all for listening. We'll talk soon.